Welcome to the Career Ready podcast. Learn about resumes, cover letters, LinkedIn, interviewing, and all the things you need to be career ready with the Career Services Center at College of DuPage. I'm one of your hosts, Rebecca Harrington. In today's episode, I'm going to talk about tips to make your first week as an intern a success.
And I'm your other host, Jordan Rembrecht. I'm going to start our episode today answering a listener mailbag question submitted to careerpodcasts@cod.edu. The question we received was, how do I keep track of all the different people I meet at a new company? Now, this is a good question because there are a lot of people that you interact with. Thinking even the initial interview phase, you're interacting with the human resources representative, the hiring manager. Also, panel interviews nowadays are very common, where you may have multiple people interviewing you at once, oftentimes your future teammates. And with that comes the need to remember the different people that you meet with. So my recommendation would be during the interview to make note of the names of each interviewer. After the interview, but before you drive home, so when it's still fresh in your mind, write down their title and how you would be connected to them in the job. Also think ahead to when you start the internship. You're going to be meeting even more new people. So during your first week, I recommend having a notebook with you, writing down the names, the titles, the departments of the different people that you meet with. Do this after you meet with them or after you finish your tour. Just like taking notes on a new topic, this will help you retain the information and avoid any awkwardness by forgetting people's names. The larger the company, the more departments there are, the more employees there are. So by taking notes, you'll start to piece together these connections and how you may interact with these coworkers or departments in the future.
Great advice. I would say too, during the interview, it's okay to re-ask somebody like, oh, I'm so sorry. Can you I want to make sure I get this down. Or it is okay to take the notes and write it down. It just shows that you're interested.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Or I say, ask for business cards. Sometimes they don't have them, which is fine. But if they do, that saves a lot of steps.
Sure.
All right. So before we talk about tips for your first week, we're actually going to go back to Jordan for a minute because she has some great tips to think about in the months, weeks, and days before you start your internship.
Yeah, so as we've talked about on prior episodes, some companies hire for interns significantly in advance. So summer offers may be extended as early as September the prior year. And while you may accept the offer then, there's still going to be an onboarding component that will likely happen closer to your start date. If the company requires a background check or drug screen, it'll likely happen closer to your start date so that the company can stay compliant with their background check policy, which is typically 60 to 90 days before the start date. If this is the case, ask the HR representative at the time you accept the offer when to expect the onboarding details to be sent to you. Make a reminder on your calendar for that date to keep an eye on your inbox as well as that spam folder. Also, I recommend to be proactive in your communication and questions. There may be some time when there's quote-unquote radio silence from the company in the weeks or months leading up to your internship. Don't be afraid to ask important questions. If it's within a week of your start date and you haven't yet been communicated logistics for your first day, reach out to your manager so that you both have time to coordinate. And lastly, when it comes to what you should bring with you on your first day of work, always a good idea to ask what you need to bring. One that's very common would be documents for your I-9, because U.S. employers must complete an I-9 form for their new hires. You'll need to bring documents with you on your first day so that employers can verify both your identity and work authorization. If you're unsure of what types of documents you need, check out the USCIS website beforehand. If you need your birth certificate that you haven't seen in 20 years, don't wait to look for it.
Great advice. Yes, absolutely. That's one of those things that I think we forget about, especially if you haven't done it before or it's been a while.
Sure.
Yeah, those things, or if you just recently moved maybe out of your parents' house and now all of a sudden you need those things, like you want to make sure you have the time to get those documents before you start. All right, so then now it's here, right? It's our first day. It can be very exciting and overwhelming. So you're learning about a new environment, new people, new expectations, often all at the same time. So let's talk about how to start strong in your first week as an intern. Even if you're nervous or unsure, trust me, all interns feel the same. In fact, I would say all new hires feel the same, but especially interns. So tip 1 is to show up curious, not perfect, right? So let's start with this. No one expects you to know everything on day 1. Your job in the first week is not to be perfect. It's to be curious, to be excited, to learn more. So you're going to ask questions. You're going to take notes. You're going to observe how people communicate and work together. When I think about being curious, what I think most about is asking questions. If you're not sure how to do something or you don't understand what someone asked you to do, say something like, I want to make sure I'm doing this correctly. Can you walk me through it? This tells your supervisor that you care about getting it right. Here are some other things that come up again and again when I talk to supervisors who work with interns. They don't expect you to know everything. They don't expect perfection, but what they do want is communication. Most supervisors wish interns knew that asking questions is a good thing. Admitting you're unsure is better than guessing, and speaking up early prevents bigger problems later. One supervisor told me, if an intern is quiet, I don't assume they're confident. I worry that they're lost. And I always say this because it happened to me one time and I vowed never again. I would rather look a little silly now than a lot silly later when I mess up and they ask, why didn't you just ask if you were unsure? Don't just be like, well, oh wait, did they say I should do this first or that first? Even if they already told you, even if it's in your notes, but for some reason your notes are unclear, trust me, they prefer that you go and ask before just assuming. Ask, can you clarify this? I want to double check my understanding. Also, this is a big one. Is this the right priority? Because you could, as an intern, likely the first day is going to be very controlled as far as, you're going to the onboarding process and meeting a lot of people. But as you go, you might start getting projects from different people. And if you are ever at a point where you're not sure, okay, well, this person gave me a project and this other person gave me a project, to go to your supervisor and ask, what is the priority? Or you just told me 3 different things I should do. What do you recommend I start with? Another questions that you can think about, I guess really to show initiative as you're doing your work. It doesn't mean that you have to do everything by yourself, right? So as you work, follow up after you have a meeting to make sure that you, again, ask questions about what happened or, do the things that they talked about that you do in the meeting. Sending a quick recap email. Thank you for talking with me today. I really appreciated learning about these things. It sounds like my next step is to do this. That may seem like overkill, but it's not. Especially in the beginning, it's always helpful to make sure that both of you heard the same thing during the meeting. And then you can even just ask, what's the next step? What do you recommend I start with? And of course, let someone know when you're stuck, right? That is the biggest thing. If you sit there for, 2 hours trying to figure it out and then you have to go and ask a question, well, you just lost 2 hours of time that you could have been working. So when you do these things, here's a big one, is that it's going to actually help build trust with the people that you're working with, especially that first week. If they see that you're a person who asks when you're confused, that you make sure that your priorities are right, then they're more likely to trust you with things in the future. And so Jordan, you kind of talked about this with your listener question as far as like you're going to meet a lot of people. What do you think as far as like why it's important to build trust quickly with the people that you're working with?
Sure. So I always say, think of the people you work with as more than just your current coworkers or your current managers. They could also be mentors. They could be future references. So building that positive rapport with them, being curious, and even owning up to things is going to help strengthen that trust, which you're going to need as a foundation for these long-term connections.
Oh, that's a really good point as far as admitting when maybe you didn't do something right. That I think is very, very important because it shows, again, that you're not going to try to hide things or,
humility.
Whatever. Yeah, exactly. Obviously, if that's happening all the time, that's not great. But no, but it is better. Again, it's better to ask a question ahead of time. But if you thought you knew what you were doing and then it turns out that you didn't, own up to it. All right. Next tip is learn the unwritten rules. So this was kind of interesting. I know I didn't put it in the notes, but Jordan, I'm curious what you think about some of these. But every workplace has these rules that kind of aren't in the handbook, right? So pay attention. I kind of talked about this earlier, is how people communicate. So what we mean by that is, what is the typical way that people ask questions or talk to each other? Do they send emails? Do they use the chat software? Do they do it in person? And, when you pay attention to that, then you will start to be able to use the tools that everybody else is using, right?
Sure.
How do they run meetings? Do people talk a lot? Is it more just like you go and you listen first to the supervisor and then other people, just kind of paying attention to when it's appropriate for you to speak, right? How early are people arriving to the office, and when do they log off? I would say a good tip is you should arrive a little early, especially your first week. You don't want to take a chance of being late. But I will say you're not required to stay late at the end of the day. I mean, obviously, if they ask you to, that's your choice if you want to do that to show initiative. But definitely make sure you're getting paid for that if it's a paid internship. And then just really how formal or informal the culture is. Part of that can even just be how people dress. So, I would say dress a bit more professional, especially your first couple days. But then if you notice that people are, a little more dressed down, if you're nervous, you can even ask about it. Hey, would it be okay if I do this? Or they might hopefully give you a dress code, right? So then you would know better how you should be dressing. But it could also be, again, how informal is it? For example, your direct supervisor may not be the whole manager of the department. So, is it best to always go to your supervisor? Should you go to your coworker first? Can you go talk to that big manager, big director? If people are in and out of that office all day asking them questions, great. Then maybe you can do that too. But kind of just make sure that you're following the protocol, I guess we'll say, for the office. What do you think, Jordan, for some of those?
Yeah, I agree, especially like the communication one, because everyone has their own communication preferences, and it may depend too. There may be people that you're communicating with that is in the office right next door to you, or they may be in another office on the other side of the country. So it's, sometimes you're going to just have to, rely on email or chat, or sometimes you may work with that person who will only answer if you call them directly and they'll pick up the phone. So
yeah,
it's just kind of feeling your way out, and know too that it's okay to have those different, relying on chat with one group versus relying on email or phone or in person with others. It just takes a little bit of time to feel it out. But once you do, it feel more comfortable.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think, too, the chat is something, and email, too, is new for a lot of students, right, that are just, maybe this is your first job. And so remember that chat is not text. Right? It's not, it's similar, but, this is not necessarily the place to use too many emojis, right? Especially at first, again, that's something you'll see, like, do people send, gifts to each other or whatever? Like, okay, but for you, especially that first week, I would keep it pretty formal, full sentences,
Yes.
that kind of stuff, until you kind of figure out how people are talking. All right. Next tip. Take notes like it's your job, because it is, right? So you're going to get a lot of information quickly, especially that first week. And no one expects you to remember it all. It's so easy, especially if school is really easy for you, where you think you're like, of course I'm going to remember all of this. Like, of course I'm going to. You will not. Especially because they're going to keep coming to you with new things. It's always better to write it down, and they will notice that you're writing it down. Things to write down, as Jordan mentioned, names and roles, right? So names, roles, departments. Even ask, how will I be interacting with you? And jot that down so that you remember, oh, this is the person I go to if I have a question about this. Write down processes, and it's okay to ask them to repeat as you're writing down the process so you can make sure that you get it down correctly. password procedures. What happens if you forget a password, or what, are you going to be sharing a password with people? Jordan's got something.
I also recommend write down IT's phone number, because if you're locked out of your computer, you cannot just go to the website to check for IT's number. If you have it written down, then at least you got it.
Perfect. That is so great. That also made me think too, because it's like going on your phone. What's the phone use policy at the office? That's, even if they don't necessarily say anything, I would probably try to avoid being on your phone too much, especially that first week. And then what are their common tools and software? So, what do they use for chat? What are, you're going to be introduced to a lot of new software. Even if it's software you used in the classroom, it's probably going to be a little different when you're on site. Taking notes, as I mentioned, shows professionalism, and it saves you from having to ask the same question twice. Again, if you're ever not sure, it's better to ask. But if you write it down carefully the first time, then you're going to be a lot more successful later. They should supply you with a paper and a pen, right? If not a laptop. But obviously, if they don't, please ask. You're not expected to bring those things with you. Again, if you have a favorite pen or something, feel free to bring it. But but they definitely should provide that. But they may not think of it, right? So they might start to tell you something, and you're like, "Ooh, I should be writing this down." Ask, oh, hey, is there a place I can get a, pad of paper and a pen or pencil? And then that way, you'll have that to take your notes. All right. Tip 4, clarify expectations early. One of the most important conversations you can have in your first week is about expectations. And this should be with your direct supervisor. Now, you might have 2 supervisors, right? You might have one that's your team manager. Maybe the other is the person that you're working with most directly every day. Maybe you're splitting your time between 2 different teams. But whoever those people are, that person or those people are, ask them questions like, what does success look like in this role? Right? What would you want me to be doing to be successful? Another question, what should I focus on learning first? Because again, you might be shown 3 different things, but there might be one that they want you to prioritize. Again, hopefully they'll tell you that, but if they don't, ask. And then of course, this one's a good one because they don't always think about it. Ask, if I have questions or concerns, who should I ask? Who's my day-to-day go-to person? Because again, it may not be your manager. It might be a coworker. So make sure you've got all that information and keep asking these questions as you go through your internship, but especially that first week, get some clarification. All right, last tip here, or not last tip. I think we've got one more after this. But tip 5, introduce yourself, even if it's awkward. This kind of relates back to the listener question that Jordan shared earlier. While it can feel awkward or uncomfortable, introducing yourself matters. So in other words, you'll be introduced to people, but there are also times you're going to need to introduce yourself. So a simple, hi, I'm your name, the new intern working with whatever the team is. Nice to meet you. Super simple, doesn't have to be long. Maybe practice it, right? The day before if you're nervous. But you've got to feel comfortable going up to people and introducing yourself. Building those relationships early will help you feel more comfortable asking questions later, and it shows initiative. Now, we told you to write down people's names, but if you forget someone's name or you don't have your notes with you or you forgot to mark down something, whatever, ask them the next time you see them. It's totally fine to say, I'm sorry, I've met a lot of people this week. Can you remind me of your name? Here's the thing. If you don't do that the first time you realize that you don't remember their name and you just keep talking to someone whose name you don't remember, it's going to be much more awkward later when someone says that person's name and you have to admit that you don't know it. So they might refer to somebody in a department. Oh, Jenny in, payroll, and in your mind, you're like, oh no, they're pretending like, or they're acting like I should know who this is. And I don't know who this is. Right. So yes, as awkward as it is, it's totally fine. And to be honest, there's a good chance they won't remember your name. So it'll give you both a chance to reintroduce yourselves. All right. Last tip for your whole internship. Remember that this is a learning experience. Your internship is not just about tasks. It's about learning how work actually happens. You are allowed to make mistakes, to ask for help, and to learn what you don't like just as much as what you do like. Starting strong is not about being flawless or perfect. It's about being engaged, prepared, and open to learning. Any other thoughts, Jordan, on a first week intern? Anything you've seen like someone do that was just like, oh no?
I'd say, it goes back to like the setting the expectations, some of it can be done even like before you start, just clarify like, what time do I arrive? Where do you want me to park? You don't want to park in
Where
that.
should I eat my lunch?
Yeah. Should I bring my lunch?
Yes.
Even my first day.
Right. Yeah. Because sometimes your supervisor takes you to lunch the first day.
Sure.
Absolutely.
So some of these things you can flesh out a little bit more in advance. And then, as Rebecca said, there's some great questions about expectations once you do start. But hopefully, you feel a little bit more prepared kind of going into it, and then just take it day by day. It could be a lot of information. It could be a lot of people. But again, no one's expecting you to memorize everything. It's okay to ask someone's name if you forgot it after the first meeting, because people do understand at the end of the day, we're all human.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I love that idea of just asking ahead of time about lunch or parking and all of that, because I think that first day can be such a nerve-wracking experience that if you can have that information ahead of time, you'll feel more
in control.
I love it. Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, and again, they understand that you're an intern. They understand that you're there to learn, and they're excited to help teach you and get the next generation ready.
Absolutely.
All right.
So thanks to all of our listeners for joining us today. We hope you feel better prepared to start your internship. As a reminder, we answered a listener question earlier in the episode, and if you have a question you want to hear answered in a future episode, you can submit it to careerpodcast@cod.edu. Join us for our next episode for more information to help you be career ready.